G'day, my name is Frank. I'm here in Brisbane, Australia, and I'm going to take you on a journey that most of you have never been on before. It's going to be exciting. You will realise that you've missed out on a lot of things that I'm going to share with you today. Just a bit of background for myself. I was born in Germany, central Germany, in the forests. And my grandfather actually owned the local sawmill. I want to introduce you to my mate here. Now, I call it my mate because it gives me oxygen. Every time I go like that, I breathe out carbon dioxide. It uses the chlorophyll in the leaves in connection with sunlight, and it converts it to carbon, which is the basic material for life, and it gives me O2 or oxygen as a waste product. Now, isn't that beautiful? Now, I want to introduce you to two different species. This one here is actually, I think it's a lily pilly, very common tree in Queensland. And it can grow to 10 metres tall, and it supplies us with the oxygen, and you notice it has leaves. Now, it is classified botanically as a hardwood. That means it has leaves and bears fruit, whereas this one here, I cut that this morning off a pine tree. Now, this one has needles, not leaves, but it still has the chlorophyll in it, which is the substance that is used by the tree with sunlight to convert CO2 just to plain carbon, or C, and the O2 is emitted as a waste product. So, when you walk through a forest, what do you feel? Fresh air. Because every tree around you emits the O2, and you can fill your lungs with beautiful clean air. So, what happens now? I want to show you a cross-section of a tree. So, you can see the bark on the outside. That's like our skin. Trees have skin or bark. In the middle, this orange section is what they call the heartwood. We have a heart, and it is the hardest and oldest part of the tree. And then on the outside, you can see the difference in colour. It is called sapwood. It is the immature, youngest part of the tree. And as the tree grows, the sapwood goes wider and wider, and the inner part of the sapwood becomes mature through aging and becomes part of the heartwood. Now, in Australia, when we first colonised the country, many acres of land were cleared through to ring barking. So what you do, you cut into the tree all the way around into what they call the cambium layer, which is the second layer around here under the bark, and it stops the tree from growing because all the sap that goes up into the branches has been stopped. So ring barking was a very effective but a long-term way of killing off trees where agricultural land need to be gained from the country. So rather than cut the tree down everywhere, you just ring bark them, and 6 months later or earlier you could go back and then the tree was dead, and then you would utilise it. Now, not the sort of practice I would recommend nowadays. In the forestry industry back in Germany, as I said, logging was done very selectively, and you take out the tallest trees in the forest, so the crown is higher than the other trees. You take it out by removing the trunk from the rest of the forest. You don't just go through the place with two bulldozers and a big chain between them and then rip the guts out of the whole place. That is very irresponsible and not good for the environment. You may know in Southern California they have sequoia trees that are thousands of years old. I've actually seen one where they put a road straight through the bottom of the trunk. It's that big. Now that tree is so huge it could never be cut down. So that's good because it can stay there for another 1,000 years and give us oxygen. So that's the difference between hardwood, and the pines are called softwood. And the reason for that is it's a botanical classification so that you know what you're working with. Now I've got a few samples here that I'll show you so you understand the difference between soft and hardwood. Now in the winter, hardwoods, they shed their leaves. You've seen that. Our trees lose their leaves because they go into a winter hibernation, whereas pines, they are called evergreens. They're forever green. Even in the coldest of winters, up around the North Pole or in the tundra, the trees may be covered in snow and ice, but they are still green because they're meant to be that way to give us oxygen. Now, I've got a piece of what they call bending ply. It's only very thin, and it is good for using on curved surfaces. You can see these knots, right? They are actually a cross-section of every branch that you expose when you cut the tree. Knots are very beautiful if you're building furniture, but not very suitable for when you're doing construction. I've got a piece here, as you can see, that has a knot here and a knot there. And if that were to be used in construction, you'd have all sorts of problems. Because as you can imagine, that's broken, that's broken. And because of the knots, it is structurally unsuitable. So when you have pines that are chosen for construction, there is a regulation that there are no more than so many knots per lineal metre. So it restricts the amount of knots in a timber and gives it more strength. Now, my desire is to show you the basics of timber, its growth, its features, its beauty, and its use. So when you understand what you're working with, it makes a job a lot easier. Now timber has what they call a grain. You can see here, again, the knot, and you can see the grain? Now, the grain always points upward. See the pointy end? That's the way the tree grows. So when you're working with timber, particularly when you're planing, you need to always appreciate the direction of the grain. So when you plane the other way, and you plane against the grain, it lifts the fibres up instead of pushing them down, and you get a very rough surface. So timber is a living material that needs to be worked with. It's not like rock or steel or other materials like aluminium, other man-made materials that have no grain as such. You can cut it, drill it, whatever you like in any direction, whereas timber is very sensitive to the way you operate it. So, this is a piece of radiata, which is a pine that comes from New Zealand, and it is a softwood, but not necessarily soft, like the timber that is used for model aeroplanes, balsa, is a hardwood botanically, but very soft and light, and you model builders, you're going to appreciate that. even though it's light, it is still a hardwood, so it's just a botanical classification. Now you can see some of the faults, this here, in the growth. We don't really know what caused it, but sometimes the grain just stops and the sap goes in different directions, often called a gum pocket. The gum is the sticky part in the timber, and we can get rid of that if we need to. If it's in a visual area, we can cut that out with a chisel and put an implant in there. So I've got another piece here. That I've selected. You can see it's got another knot that's fallen out, which is called a dead knot, and on the edge it's got part of the bark still on. That's this piece here. See, this is a piece that's been cut from a tree, and they get to the edge of the tree and it wasn't wide enough, so the bark is still exposed. So these are some of the faults that we have to deal with in wood. Now, the hardwood, as I said, it has leaves and bears fruit. The pine, it has cones. So the seeds are in the cones. Once they open up and all these little pieces here fall off, they're individual seeds for the procreation of the species. So, when you see a lot of pine cones around, you know you're in a pine forest. If you see dropped fruit around, like apples or lemons or whatever, they come off the vine, you know you've got fruit trees. So that's the big difference. Now, one of my favourite materials is cherry wood, because it has a beautiful texture and a beautiful colour. Now, timber comes in all sorts of colours, and I'll show you them in a minute, because as woodworkers, I consider ourselves as doctors, wood doctors, because a lot of the things that we do are very close to what medical doctors do. We address these. Could be a melanoma, could be a blood clot. So we can fix those with the right tools and the right skills and a bit of patience. Right. Over here, I've already cut most of it out with I'll just finish that cut and show you what's going on. So what I have here is what they call a coping saw. It's got a bow with a movable blade. You can spin it round like so, and then cut the rest of it out like that. So what we do, we cut out the offending piece, and then we find a suitable donor, which would be this piece here, if I can get it off. See? And what you do, you try and match the grain to go in there, like so. So it looks about the same. You can see how the grain runs across like that. So we can do implants. So we are wood doctors, if you like, because we do a lot of things that repair the faults in timber. Now I can cut the wane off. This is called a wane, which is still part of the bark. I can plane that out and then make a suitable piece to fit in there. So if I'm running short of a certain species of timber or wood, I then have this piece to replace, and I don't have to go and get more. Now, what is wood? You might say, what is wood basically? Well, wood is basically fibre. Now, we've got sawdust here. I keep my sawdust for a reason. because I'm a great recycler. I love using offcuts or other timber that's been reclaimed through destruction of old buildings, and I use whatever I can. Everything on this bench except the top, I use offcuts from home that I had. Now the bench top itself, it's made of rubbish, if you like, or leftovers of the timber industry. Once we strip the bark off the trees, we have this left over, and that gets ground up with other leftovers, mixed with a certain glue, and then compressed under high pressure and heat into making man-made materials that will supplement the timber that we can't get anymore. I've got a piece of timber at home that is that wide, no joints, because trees used to grow that big. So we could get planks out of it that wide as the trunk was. So today, unfortunately, we have logged all our good stuff, and we have to really look out that we don't destroy the environment to the degree that there are none of these blokes here that give us oxygen. So let's be more responsible in the way we handle our timber. So wherever you live, try and use what you have. Now, certain timbers are suitable for construction, as I said. Usually hardwoods are better than softwoods. But in order to use softwoods, we need to treat the timber. Now, you will see, again, there is a knot, a very healthy one because it's still there. Do you notice the colour? The colour is different. That one is a nice piney colour. This one is a green colour. Now this piece here, it's been treated with a chemical. So what's been done under pressure, all the moisture, the natural moisture in the wood has been pushed out and replaced with a chemical. It's called CCA. I won't go into the details of it. You don't need to know the chemistry of it. But CCA treated timber is now water resistant. So instead of it being subjected to the weather and then the fibre, which is cellulose, falling apart because of too much rain or too much moisture, like leaking taps in a house or broken pipes in the ground, it will rot timber over time because the timber is not made or not mature enough for that sort of work. So softwood is usually used inside the house for furniture, staircases, linings on the walls, anything inside the house, doors, architraves, the frame around the house, it's at the door, all that is used inside the house, whereas hardwood is used outside the house. So I'm going to show you a few samples of man-made products. Now, I've written on the back 2 classifications. Is that all right there? DAR stands for dressed all round. That means it's been planed on both edges and on both faces. So it's suitable for furniture making or for doors, etc. Whereas this, the RS stands for rough sawn. So as it comes off the sawmill, it's left that way because it's an outside material. In this case, that is a fence paling that's been treated so it can be used in the weather and it's not subjected to rot. Now, a lot of people, they misunderstand dry rot and wet rot. They say, oh, I've got to replace my palings or whatever because it's got dry rot in it. Now, dry rot is a timber disease. It's a fungus that grows within the tree, possibly in here, like that, and it deteriorates the fibres because of the fungal growth. It is not anything that has to do with moisture. Now, have a look at this. This is what they call wet rot. Right? It has deteriorated, as you can see, from water. It's been out in the weather for too long. It hasn't been treated with this material, the green CCA. It's just been left outside and it's actually succumbed to all the moisture. And this piece as well, that's had too much water, but it is not dry rot. It's just plain deterioration through too much moisture. So consider this when you are building something outside, like a shed or something, or a fence. Make sure you use the right type of timber and make sure it has been treated appropriately. And if you use this sort of stuff inside, obviously it doesn't need to be treated. Like furniture, staircases, all those sort of things that are made inside. And now I'm going to introduce you to the man-made products that we have on the market now. And I've made a box for teaching purposes. You can see I have made dovetails on the corners just to highlight how one can join timber. Now, all these materials, that's real timber. You can see by the grain. It's got the grain going that way and it's got the growth rings going through there. Now when I talk growth rings, I'm talking about this. I just want to show you, this is the pith of the tree. That's the little sapling that just came out of the seed. And every year the tree takes carbon out of the atmosphere and applies it around the pith. You can tell there is dark and light areas. So the light area is a quick growth during the summer because there's plenty of sunlight. In the winter, the tree sort of slows down because there's less sunlight and it applies the carbon slowly, not in a great growth spurt like we have teenagers that have growth spurts. They grow 6 inches in a year or less. Now, so you can tell from here, if you count the rings, this is 1 year, prolific growth, 1 winter, another summer, 1 winter, another spring, actually spring and summer. And so you can count each ring, or each 2 rings, which make up 1 year. They have 2 seasons for 2 rings. So you can tell that this is real wood because of the growth rings. Now you can tell by the amount of rings, growth rings in that, how old this tree must have been when it was felled. Now this is what we call Tassie oak or Tasmanian oak. Other people, refer to mountain ash, so they're different terminology, but it's the same wood. It is a hardwood. It is beautiful for outside trims, where it is resistant to the weather, and inside, if it's dressed, like dressed all around, it highlights the grain, and once it's varnished or polished or stained, it is just beautiful. It is a true piece of work when you look at it, and you can really appreciate what timber is all about. I've got a piece of pine, as you can tell by the knot. It is a softwood. Again, you can identify the growth rings, which are further apart. Now, pine trees grow a lot quicker, as you can see by the rings. You've got a spurt, a spring, summer spurt, a growth spurt. So a pine tree can grow 13 to 15 years before it can be harvested, or it should be harvested. So that's why north of Brisbane we have forests in the northern suburbs of what they call plantation pine, which we harvest every 15 or so years for softwood. Now hardwood, well, you've got to wait for a generation to pass because some trees are hundreds of years old. Looking at the other materials, this one here, you can tell by the bits and pieces that I've used on the vise. This is called merbau, which is a Malaysian hardwood, and it is hard, touch wood. So that is ideal for decking and exterior work, and as long as you keep it oiled every year or so, it will last forever. So it is not subjected to moisture like rain, etc., because it just has that nature. It is part of the heartwood. It's cut out of the middle. Right, you can tell by the colour difference. That's the heartwood. That's where that comes from, somewhere around there. So it is very good to use outside. Now all these here, these are all man-made products. I'll see if we can get past them. All these are man-made products. This one here, it was one of the first materials invented back in the 50s. It is nothing more than compressed sawdust. Because when we were working at the sawmill, there were mountains and mountains of sawdust that nobody knew what to do with. And rather than throw it out, somebody came up with a great idea of recycling or repurposing all the sawdust. So they said, right, we'll mix that with a glue. Today it's called formaldehyde, very strong glue. We compress it all together and make a sheet of board out of it. Now, back in the 50s and 60s, I used to build kitchens out of this stuff. The problem with that is it's not waterproof, let alone water resistant. If you've got a leaking tap at home and you don't pick up on it, this will take on all the moisture that comes off the leak, and it will blow up and become nearly twice as wide as this, or twice as thick, because it takes in all the water and just blows up. So that's not a good material to use where there's water. Now the next thing, they made a material called HMR, highly moisture resistant. It's the same principle, but it has the CCA in it. The greeny colour is the same material inside the sawdust. So it is much more water resistant, and it's covered in what we call melamine. It's a white plastic coating, and if it's used as a shelf inside a unit in the kitchen or in the wardrobes, it is much more water resistant. So it is a very good material if it's used inside. I wouldn't use it outside for any reason unless it's undercover. Now this here is a version. There's my MDF. This is MDF. It's called medium density fibre, and it's made of all the rubbish that comes off the bark of the tree, as I said before, compressed, and that's what this bench top's made of. And I've painted it top and bottom so it is water resistant. Now for some applications we need waterproof MDF. So it's not just moisture resistant, it is waterproof. I cut off a piece of that one day at work, put it in a jar of water, and 2 days later I measured it. It's the same width, and it did not take on water because it is fully impregnated with the same green material that keeps the water out of it. Now another thing too, now when we get a shortage of wood, there is a solution. What we do, we put a veneer over the top so that it looks like wood. Very popular back in the 60s when we started running out of solid timbers, but we had plenty of veneer. Now veneer is a I'll just show you these. I have a whole library of veneer. See these pieces here, they are all timber in a slice. See, very thin. It'll crack if I go too far. Now this is made. It used to be made in the factory where they make plywood. So I've got dark veneer, even darker veneer. See, this is cherry, which I mentioned before. It's got a beautiful grain. You notice the grain going upwards to the pointy bit? That's how the tree used to grow. Then we have this colour here. I can go through the whole lot. This is ash, which is another hardwood. Again, on this one, this is maple. Right? This is American maple. Again, the grain. And then we have the darker stuff, walnut. I can go through the whole lot. So you can see, no matter what timber, we need to overlay a basic material like this. It is available. And then this one here, that is a laminated material. It's plastic. When we run out of these, we can go to plastic, which is actually a pattern that is photographed onto plastic or MDF on this stuff. We put a colour pattern on it and it makes it look like timber. Again, a cheap option, but we had to do it because we were running out of natural wood. So we also have different thicknesses of plywood. Now plywood means multiple layers of. So if I put 3, 5, 7, 9 or any odd number of veneers together, I can make a piece of plywood. Alright, like that. And on the back got a different colour. But in the middle is just MDF, or it is actually a plywood. Where are we here? Where's my plywood? Ah, here. Here we go. There's a piece of plywood there. Alright, it's got outside, inside, and it's got multiple layers in there which go across that way, and then that way, and that gives it strength. So, I've introduced you to wood, to veneers, which are a beautiful way of overlaying cheaper timber or board that are manufactured by man, and then we can appreciate the beauty of God's creation in the wood. Timber is a beautiful material, and once you get to know the characteristics, you can work with it and create a beautiful piece of furniture.